Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast, Season 5, Episode 6. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. You could take a week off, ladies. It's an all-sports episode. The Dallas Mavericks trade Luka Doncic to the LA Lakers, getting back only the unibrow in what appeared to be a pretty lopsided trade. But I believe NBA teams are becoming like the fans. If the players don't care, then the teams don't care, and the fans don't care. And you don't pay $70 million a year to someone who doesn't look like they care. And the polar bear is back. The Mets signed Pete Alonso to a 2-year, $54 million deal that he can opt out of after the first year. Fanboy Patrick is excited. Thank you all for listening, for coming back week after week after week. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear and you like the fact that there are no ads on this podcast, please consider supporting.
Act 1. NBA teams are no longer accepting of players embodying the smoking Jay Cutler approach.
I did a segment on the NBA where I espoused the opinion, and I think it's now starting to become more commonplace amongst not only NBA fans, but just in the lexicon of the sports talk media landscape. It appears the players don't care, so fans now don't care. And there was a blockbuster trade between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Dallas Mavericks that I think is illustrative of the fact that it's not just the fans that are becoming disgusted with the laissez-faire attitude of the players. Here you have a team in Dallas that had their star player, Luka Doncic, lead them to the NBA Finals the year prior, a legitimate superstar in the league. They're willing to part with him for what is, or what amounts to, pennies on the dollar when you think about some of the other blockbuster trades for marquee players, for all NBA type players. And what would be the catalyst for Dallas to do this? There's a lot of people speculating that it just doesn't make any sense. And after looking at all of the material that's out there, there are conspiracy theories, there's all this different type of subversive speculation about why Dallas would do this. To me, it's clear. Zion Williamson is a catalyst for many teams, many GMs about what it is to be a professional basketball player and what it is for a franchise to tie themselves to that type of player. If you have a marquee player on your franchise, one that is a league leader in a number of offensive categories, one that is young, that you could argue is still developing, and yet that player cannot stay in shape, cannot strictly adhere to an exercise regimen, a diet regimen, and you're going to, in a max contract year, Luka Doncic's contract expires, they're going to have to offer him at the end of next season a max contract, and given the way the NBA rules work, their salary cap works, the man's going to be entitled to $345 or $350 million over the course of 7 years. That's going to be one of the largest contracts in NBA history. You're tying yourself to someone who you can argue, well, they're 25 years old, they're only going to get better. But the downside of that is we're tying ourselves to someone who has demonstrated over the course of his entire career that A, he cannot maintain a diet and an exercise regimen, and B, he just doesn't like to play defense. He's not going to play defense that well unless it's in the playoffs. And by then, the habits that one has developed or formed over the course of an entire season, they're so bad, they're so sloppy, you're not going to get the kind of defensive performance that you would expect out of your marquee, your number one player, the guy that you're paying $50 or $60 million to every season. I have personally made the excuse for NBA players that there's way too many games, that these games are too close together, so you have players who are playing back-to-back games, and it takes a toll on your body. All of us who have traveled for work know that it can be taxing to take a trip for 7, 10, sometimes 2 weeks. That is a very long trip to be away from home, particularly if you're going from city to city, staying in hotel rooms. At the end of that trip, you're exhausted. And we're not doing anything in a work capacity that's physical in nature. The NHL, the NBA, they play a lot of games. They're on the road a lot. These games are back to back. So yes, you want to cut some of these players slack for having a very rigorous schedule to follow, being on the road a considerable amount of time. But over the course of the last 5 years, ever since COVID, it seems that players have gotten more and more entitled to be hurt and not play based on, frankly, whatever whim they have. You've got players who are constantly defying their own medical staff or their medical personnel, the medical recommendations from their own team. You have players that are structuring their own playing time. They're basically saying, I don't want to play but X amount of minutes per game, or I'm only going to play so many games back to back. You've got all of these players suffering these malignant injuries, and you're thinking to yourself, as a fan, particularly as a season ticket holder, why am I spending all of this money to see a bunch of guys that they're paying $45, $60, $70 million to a year sit in street clothes in a chair next to the bench, and a bunch of guys that I've never heard of go out and shoot threes for 45 minutes to an hour? Dallas's move makes perfect sense to me now that I've read all the information that I've read. You have someone in Luka Doncic, that is. He seems to be more of a free spirit, and he just doesn't take his fitness or his diet that seriously because he never had to. He's so good that it hasn't impacted his game, or at least he doesn't think it's impacted his game. And I want to give you an analogy because I think this fits perfectly, even though it's from a different sport. If you've watched the ESPN 30 for 30 documentary on Michael Vick, it goes well into all of his criminal activity with the dog fighting and all of that, and it's an important part of his story. But what I thought the most important part of his story was in his redemption when he was playing for the Philadelphia Eagles, and Andy Reid basically demanded, you've got to put all of your distractions aside, and you've got to come and be a pure quarterback for an entire off season so you can make up for lost time. And when he did that, Vic realized how good he could have been in light of the fact that he was not studying at all. He was not learning how to become a better quarterback. He wasn't studying defensive alignments for other teams. He wasn't mastering the offense that he was in. Vic was strictly relying on his talent, and he was still one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League. Now, this is not a criticism of Michael Vick. The thing about life that is so curious is that we have the information that we have at the time that we make the decisions that we make. It's sad that we don't have more information or that we're not willing to listen to advice from people who may be wiser or maybe looking out for our best interest, though we don't realize it. But basically, Michael Vick was entitled to believe that his talent could carry him. He didn't have to do the same things that other players had to do in order to be great on Sunday, in order to make millions and millions of dollars and win football games. And so his work ethic was lackluster. And it very likely cost him the ability to win a Super Bowl, particularly when he was in Atlanta. As a demonstration of the growth and development of Michael Vick as a human being, as a man, he admits as much, that he could have been even greater at Virginia Tech. He could have been greater as an Atlanta Falcon if he had just gone in to these quarterback meetings and studied his own offense, dedicated himself to mastering it, studied defenses, understanding what would work against those defenses and what wouldn't. So that, yes, he could still make those dynamic plays with his legs when things broke down, but he was able to better see opportunity instead of having to rely on his legs, because the one opponent that he's never going to beat, and no athlete ever will, is Father Time. Let's harken back now then to Luka Doncic. Luka is hurt right now, and I guarantee you there's some kind of medical report or there's some type of internal assessment within the Dallas Mavericks front office that says this guy is probably hurt because his fitness sucks, or the longevity of his injury is much longer than it would be if he were in great shape. And this is probably partly Mark Cuban's fault because Cuban loved Doncic so much, let him get away with terrible discipline in his diet and his exercise. And the new owners of the Mavericks, they're not going to put up with it. Now, I've heard this conspiracy theory about how the Adelsons, who are now the majority owner, it's Sheldon Adelson's widow, who is the majority owner of the Dallas Mavericks. The Adelsons have, of course, a large stake in casinos in Las Vegas. Their presence is basically in Las Vegas. This dumbass conspiracy theory, and it's nothing more than that. It's at its best and its finest, most soundly articulated, fucking stupid. That the Adelsons would trade away assets in order to get the team to tank so that attendance would go down so that they could move the team to Las Vegas. And I'm thinking to myself, that is just how stupid so many people are when it comes to business, particularly when it comes to sports. Stan Kroenke didn't run the St. Louis Rams into the ground so that he could leave St. Louis and go to L.A. For that matter, and I can't remember, Stanos, I believe, is the last name of the guy who owns the Chargers. He did the same thing. He didn't run the Chargers into the ground in order to tank attendance so that he could move to L.A. None of these owners now feel like the record of their team or the attendance of that team is indicative of whether or not they're going to be able to move to a new city. It's all about the stadium. If you can get a new stadium built, you're staying in the city that you're in. If you can't get a new stadium built, you're leaving. It doesn't matter what the attendance is. It doesn't matter what the fans think. So this notion that somehow we're living out the plot of Major League, the movie, and if fan attendance falls below a certain number, the team can move. That's nonsense. The team can move whenever it wants based on whether the city that they're in is going to give them all the money they want to make improvements to the stadiums. They're going to give them the concessions that they want. Fan enthusiasm has nothing to do with it. This is truly, in my mind, the Adelsons looking at someone like Doncic instead of with this familial type energy that Mark Cuban had for him and saying, look, if this kid can't diet and exercise well enough to stay healthy throughout the course of the season and he's not going to play defense, why the fuck are we going to give him $350 million to watch him age out of being great anymore? To watch him eat his way into having more and more problems in his late 20s because he refuses to take fitness and diet seriously. Dallas is an excellent team. They just went to the finals. You add Anthony Davis in the mix and you're thinking to yourself, if you're a Dallas Mavericks fan, we've got 2 to 3 seasons to try to win a championship with this roster, and then it's probably going to get blown up. But is that worse than having a fat, unhealthy Luka Doncic on your team in 4 years, paying him $74 million to see him in street clothes? The New Orleans Pelicans fans are going to say, hell yes. I'd rather take this 2 to 3 year window and try to win a championship than have somebody on the team that's only going to get older and only going to get heavier and less able to recover from injury. There isn't a Philadelphia 76ers fan who wouldn't take that deal. There isn't a Los Angeles Clippers fan who wouldn't take that deal. It's not just the fans that are disgusted with the players in the league these days. It's the teams themselves. And they're able to discipline conduct in a way that fans never will be able to. How? Because they're the ones who are going to be writing the checks. They're the ones who are going to be saying to these players, if you can't at least lay off all the beer and the carbohydrates during the course of the season, we're not going to give you $75 million. And for Luka Doncic's part, I think he's going to be a 44-year-old one day that looks back at this point in his career and thinks to himself, just like Michael Vick did, what if I had taken my diet and my exercise seriously? What if I had been in the best shape of my life and I had dedicated myself to my craft, even on the defensive end? Not taking so much energy away from my offense, but it at least better understood defensive principles so that I could put myself in a position to win a championship. The irony being, none of us can have our 40 or 50-year-old self travel through time and shake the hell out of us so that we don't make the mistakes that we're going to make when we're in our 20s and our 30s. I know it's true for me, and it's probably true for a lot of you who are listening right now, that but for the fact that we make those mistakes in our 20s and 30s, we wouldn't have the wisdom that we do in our 40s and 50s. Because hell, if we're going to listen to anybody else. Luka Doncic no doubt had people in Dallas in his ear trying to help him, and it just didn't work. You want to add another level of irony? Even though they're in the gambling business, the Adelsons weren't willing to gamble $50 or $60 or $70 million a year on a guy that hadn't proven that he's a reliable commodity. The house always wins, dear listener, and unfortunately, although a lot of people may disagree with it, I believe the house won again, and Dallas made the right decision.
Act 2, the polar bear returns.
It took a little longer than any Mets fan anticipated or was comfortable with, but Pete Alonso will return to the New York Metropolitans on a 2-year, $54 million contract, a bridge contract, as they are being called now, for players that believe their value is much higher than what they have signed for, but whose recent numbers or age or circumstances has led teams to believe their best years are behind them. Alonso, a homegrown talent, came up through the Mets farm system, broke out in 2019, led the majors in home runs, captured the imagination of the New Yorker. Alonso has had some great moments as a New York Met. Unfortunately, as a fan of Pete Alonso's and as a fan of the New York Mets, Alonso's stats have progressively declined since he entered the majors. He has gotten a little bit worse every year, and unfortunately, in this contract year, the year of our Lord 2024, he regressed significantly. He was looking for a Freddie Freeman-style 7-year, $160 million contract, and there were just no takers. And the closest that he got was a deal from the Mets, which reportedly was either 3 years, $75 million, or 3 years, $90 million, depending on the source. But that was the best contract that he was offered, and he balked. He didn't want to take it. He wanted a long-term deal, and he wanted the guarantees that come with that type of extension. And nobody was willing to offer it to him. There are some in the Mets fandom that discount the way the Mets approached this negotiation. They thought that Stearns, the new Mets GM, was a little too harsh with this fan favorite, and that the Mets should just pay him the money that he was asking for. I do not agree with this. I really want to see Pete Alonso come alive in the 2025 baseball season. But I really need to see Pete Alonso come alive in the year of our Lord 2025 during this upcoming baseball season to warrant one of these long-term deals that routinely look silly in the last 3, 4, 5 years of that deal. Most of these long-term deals are for guys who are of an age where really they've got 2 to 3 really good years left. And if it's a 7-year deal, year 4, 5, 6, 7, they look worse and worse every year. And you end up shipping that player off to go out to those greener pastures, paying 80% of their contract to play for another team. Under the Wilpons, that was the Mets' modus operandi for close to 2 decades. Now they have some competent leadership, some competent ownership. It's time to take a hard look at the way you spend money. And yes, even though you could throw some examples at me, the recent signing of older pitchers that ended up being shuttered halfway through the season, that is a learning experience. And I believe that the owner, one Steve Cohn, you could say a lot of things about him, but he's not a dumb man. You burn him once, he learns. If he gets burned twice, I think he would accept the culpability, but this is somebody who learns from mistakes. He made mistakes when it came to social media and his visibility when he first acquired the team. You did not see in the second season of his ownership the same type of visibility from Cohen on social media. And yes, he went out and spent money like a drunken sailor, like many new owners do. And I think he learned his lesson from the Verlander and the Scherzer debacle. The only good thing to come of that is the picks that the Mets received and the prospects that they received in those trades. But you're paying 2 pitchers $20, $30, $40 million not to play for you. Pete Alonso is 31 years old. His stats have progressively gone down every year. If you could just get the Pete Alonso of 2 years ago, that may warrant
a longer-term deal that is somewhere in the range of a Freddie Freeman. Not as lucrative, of course, but maybe 5 years, 115, 120, 125 million. For his part, I'm sure Alonso is looking at his options under this contract. He can opt out after the first year. So it's in his interest, right? It behooves him to play as well as he's played in the past 5 seasons this year in order to secure the kind of contract that he was looking for in this offseason. And what's more, he has the team around him to do it. He is not going to be isolated in that lineup. That lineup is going to be stacked, so he's going to be protected. He's going to have the opportunity to see quality pitches. Now he has to come through. He has to hit well with men on base. He needs to hit for power to the opposite side of the field, which he did pretty well when he was a younger man and did not do so well last season. $27 million for 2 years for Pete Alonso, is that a lot of money? It probably is. But the fan in me doesn't give a damn. The fan in me is happy that he's coming back after this historic season, this memorable postseason that he and his teammates gave us in the year of our Lord 2024. I want to see the swan song. I want to see him come back. And even if he's not going to be a Met after this season, I'd still like to see him have a superb season, and he can be happy spending the rest of his career in Flushing. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.